He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite, wiser than Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. 1 Kings 4 verse 31. In the ancient records of Israel's kings, amid a list of legendary sages, the name Darda stands out, a man whose wisdom echoed through generations, second only to that of Solomon himself. But who was this Darda? What world shaped him, and where did his wisdom take root? Our story begins in the ancient city of Shechem, nestled in the fertile hills of Canaan. Here, long before the rise of kings, amid sacred mountains and ancient altars, a sage and counselor emerged. Darda was no ordinary figure. He was a bridge builder between peoples, a diplomat of the soul, and a man whose voice carried from the highlands of Canaan to the courts of pharaohs. Today, we travel not forward through time, but backward, rewinding the clock from the rise of Rome to the highlands of ancient Shechem. You may know the name Aeneas, the legendary founder of the Roman people, hero of Troy, and son of Anchises and Venus. But what if I told you that behind his myth lies a real legacy, one encoded not only in ancient texts, but in DNA? My DNA belongs to haplogroup EV13, a paternal bloodline deeply rooted in the Balkans, yet surprisingly linked to movements from the Eastern Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. This lineage appears among ancient Greek warriors, Thracian nobles, and early European elites, and even shows up in DNA from Roman burial sites. But where did this line begin? As we trace it backwards, we pass through the ruins of Troy, where Aeneas fled with his people after the city's fall. Past the kingdom of Dardania, founded by Dardanus, the ancestral patriarch from whom the Dardanian and Trojan dynasties took their name. Past the Anatolian mountains and Hittite palaces. And further back still, to the Hyksos capital of Avaris in Egypt, where Semitic kings once ruled the Nile Delta. And at the foundation of it all, in the ancient hills of Shechem, long before Homer, we find a man known in tradition as Darda the Wise. He was said to be a great sage and advisor, one of the sons of Mahol, remembered even in the Hebrew scriptures. From Darda of Shechem to Aeneas of Rome, from EV13 warriors to Dutch noblemen, this is not just the story of ancient cities. It is the journey of a bloodline across time, carrying fragments of memory, faith, and legacy through every generation. And maybe, just maybe, that legacy still lives in us. In the shadow of great world history, there are always names that escape us. Darda, the son of Mahol, is one of them. Although only a footnote in the Bible, this figure, when we dig deeper, seems to point to a richer story than we ever could have imagined. The truth behind Darda is not a simple narrative, but a web of myths, traditions, and mysterious connections that take us back to the ancient world of Shechem and the legendary city of Troy. Shechem, a city with a deep and complex history, was once the center of knowledge and wisdom in ancient Canaan. Archaeological excavations at Tell Balatah, modern Shechem, have provided clues over the years about the significant role this city played as a cultural and religious center. Under the leadership of G. E. Wright and W. F. Albright, excavations uncovered, among other things, a fortress temple. A complex that served not only a religious function but also an administrative one. This structure suggests a city that was much more than a refuge for traders. It was a center where religion and governance went hand in hand, and where the transmission of knowledge was central. Ernst Selen and Siegfried Horn discovered cultic and administrative structures that indicate Shechem during the late Bronze Age was a regional center of importance. These findings support the hypothesis that Shechem played a key role in the dissemination of knowledge and culture. Lawrence E. Toombs and Edward F. Campbell Jr. determined that rituals and priest schools in Shechem were not just about religious practices, but also served as centers for the transmission of knowledge and education. This data provides valuable context for the figure of Darda, the son of Mahol. It is not hard to imagine that Mahol, as a wisdom teacher, was deeply involved in these knowledge networks, with he and his son Darda passing on their knowledge from the priestly schools to other parts of the region. So therefore our story begins in the ancient city of Shechem, nestled in the fertile hills of Canaan, where a wise and influential man named Darda emerges. Darda is no ordinary figure, he is a sage, a counselor, a bridge builder between peoples. At a time when kingdoms rise and fall like the tides, Darda's unique gift lies in his ability to connect cultures, ideas, and politics across boundaries. His wisdom and diplomacy earn him respect not only among the Canaanites but also among the Egyptians and the distant Hittites. Darda was born into a lineage that carried the spiritual and intellectual legacy of the northern tribes of Israel. The writings found at sites such as Serabit el-Khadim in Egypt and the Levant, including Shechem, help us further understand the wisdom traditions of the time. Proto-Canaanite and Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions, dating back to around 1600 to 1500 BC, show that the use of writing was not only common but also taught at significant sites like Shechem. This aligns with the role of Shechem as a place where not only trade and politics flourished, but intellectual exchange also took place. Moreover, the Deir Allah inscription from around 825 BC gives us a unique insight into the intellectual traditions of the region. This inscription, which documents an important religious culture of seers, reinforces the idea that intellectual and spiritual knowledge was deeply rooted in the cultural life of Canaan and its neighboring countries. These texts suggest that the wise men of Shechem, like Mahol, were part of a broader tradition of prophetic and intellectual leaders who had a profound impact on their environment. Alongside Darda lived another figure of wisdom, Mahol, believed by some scholars to be either his father or a metaphor. In biblical tradition, their wisdom was only surpassed by that of King Solomon himself. Mahol, in biblical Hebrew typically means dance, especially in poetic or liturgical contexts. For example, it's often used in Psalms to describe joyful dancing before the Lord. However, in 1 Kings 4 verse 31, Mahol is mentioned as a person, specifically the father of wise men. He, Solomon, was wiser than all other men, than Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, the sons of Mahol. This verse introduces a challenge: is Mahol a proper name here, or is it a symbolic reference? According to rabbinic literature, dance is often seen as a form of worship and spiritual expression. In Shechem, as a center of wisdom and worship, the practice of dancing in the context of worship and the transmission of wisdom could have been particularly relevant. In the Talmud, the rabbis emphasize how dance can be an expression of joy that simultaneously carries deep spiritual meanings. They viewed dance not only as a physical expression but as a spiritual exercise that opened the heart and connected it with heavenly wisdom, especially when performed in sacred places like Shechem. The Sifriyai, the rabbinic exegetical texts on the Torah, speak of how knowledge, wisdom, and worship are inseparable in Jewish life. In biblical tradition, Darda is listed among the sons of Mahol, a phrase many scholars believe refers not just to family, but to a guild of Levitical singers and sages. Ethan and Heman are both elsewhere clearly identified as Levitical temple singers. In 1 Chronicles 6 verse 33, Heman is called a singer and a descendant of Kohath, and in 1 Chronicles 15 verses 17 to 19. Heman, Asaph, and Ethan are appointed as chief musicians. Given that, it's very likely that Calcol and Darda also belong to this class, a musical and wisdom guild, trained in the sacred art of dance, psalmody, and counsel. Alongside Heman and Ethan, both known temple musicians, Darda belonged to a brotherhood that preserved knowledge through rhythm, story, and sacred song. Darda and Mahol were not only spiritual sages, but strategists and observers of the human condition. Their dwelling in Shechem placed them at a cultural crossroads. Shechem, one of the earliest known urban centers in the region, served as a sacred city. It was located near Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, where also Israelite ceremonies of blessing and cursing would take place. From this vantage point, Darda observed the movements of empires. To the south, Egypt was weakening under internal divisions. To the north, Anatolian tribes like the Hatti were expanding their influence. Trade routes buzzed with news and politics. The Bible offers us a few clues in that chapter where Solomon's knowledge and wisdom are praised, suggesting that Darda's influence, like that of other sages from the northern part of Israel, was an integral part of the wisdom traditions that were passed on to Solomon himself. The mention of Darda in this context raises the question, what kind of knowledge did this man possess? Was he simply part of a wisdom network that originated in Shechem, or did he play an even more important role in transmitting deeper mystical and religious knowledge? Given Shechem's prominent role as a center for the transmission of knowledge, it is likely that Darda was a key channel for the spread of this wisdom. Around the time Darda rose to prominence, a group of foreign rulers known as the Hyksos had taken control of Lower Egypt. These were not native Egyptians. The Hyksos are believed to have originated from the Levant or possibly even the Hittite heartlands of Anatolia. They brought with them new technologies, chariot warfare, and a more decentralized form of kingship. The Hyksos established their capital at Avaris, a thriving port city on the eastern Nile Delta. Here, cultures met: Minoans, Levantines, Hittites, and Egyptians all mingled. Darda's reputation had already reached Avaris through emissaries, traders, and scribes. The Hyksos pharaoh, likely Apophis, recognized the need for a wise Canaanite counselor to help bridge cultural gaps. Darda, accompanied by Mahol and their households, journeyed south through the land of Goshen, arriving in Avaris as foreigners, yet treated with honor. The narrative of Darda the Wise, son of Mahol, fits remarkably well within the framework proposed by Egyptologist and historian David Rohl, who advocates for a revised chronology of ancient Egypt and the Levant. Rohl's New Chronology, outlined in works such as A Test of Time and Pharaohs and Kings, posits a significant downward revision of Egyptian dates. Moving events such as the Exodus and the rise of the Hyksos to more historically and biblically compatible timeframes. Within this model, the story of Darda gains a new layer of historical plausibility. In the traditional Egyptian chronology, the Hyksos are placed around 1650 to 1550 BC. However, Rohl's model repositions the Hyksos closer to the biblical era of the patriarchs and the early judges, situating their dominance in Lower Egypt during the 15th and 14th centuries BC. This timeframe aligns well with the biblical references to early Hebrew wisdom figures and Proto-Israelite migrations. In this adjusted historical setting, Darda and Mahol appear not as mythologized figures, but as plausible historical actors, Levantine sages operating in the court of the Hyksos king Apophis. The cultural and political context of Avaris in this period matches the type of cosmopolitan, intellectually fertile environment that could have supported the presence of foreign scholars and administrators. Rohl himself suggests that Avaris was not merely a Semitic city in Egypt, but a royal capital with close ties to Canaanite, Hittite, and even Aegean elites, all of whom would have interacted with figures like Darda. The archaeological record supports this idea. Excavations at Tell Balatah or ancient Avaris under the direction of Manfred Byatak reveal layers of Levantine architecture, Minoan frescoes, and mixed burial practices, suggesting not only a multi-ethnic population but also a multicultural ruling class. At the court of Pharaoh Apophis in Avaris, during the era identified by Rohl as the flourishing period of the Hyksos dynasty, Darda and Mahol stood not as servants of foreign gods, but as faithful Levitical priests, bringing divine wisdom, spiritual order, and sacred instruction to a complex and multicultural royal court. They were not passive advisors, but active figures in shaping the intellectual, diplomatic, and moral framework of the realm. Functioning in capacities akin to viziers, scribes, and prophetic seers, their lives embodied the covenantal call to be light among the nations. Their day began before sunrise in the eastern district of Avaris, away from the temples of foreign gods, in private spaces reserved for those devoted to the God of their fathers. Mahol, the elder and a master of sacred expression, led the morning prayers, psalms, and oral teachings, preserving the Levitical traditions inherited from Shechem, the priestly center of early Israelite worship. Darda, a keeper of sacred time, studied the heavens, not for pagan omens, but to observe the order set by the Creator, aligning court life with divine rhythms and sabbatical patterns. Following their devotions, Darda would retreat to the royal archives. As a scholar fluent in multiple tongues, including Proto-Hebrew, Egyptian, and Anatolian cuneiform, he interpreted foreign correspondence and edited legal texts, always aligning his work with the justice and ethics of the God of Israel. He served Pharaoh in matters of diplomacy and record-keeping while safeguarding the spiritual integrity of his heritage. By midday, Darda and Mahol were called to the Great Hall, where Apophis convened his advisors. Here, Darda operated in a priestly seer role, not unlike that of Joseph in earlier times, interpreting dreams, guiding foreign policy, and adjudicating tribal disputes. His wisdom was known not only for its intellectual sharpness but for its moral clarity, derived from the Torah traditions passed down through his Levite lineage. Mahol, deeply embedded in Israelite oral and musical traditions, supported with parables and liturgical aphorisms. His role was not theatrical but devotional, a ministry of truth through art. Their presence gave the court an uncommon spiritual gravity, drawing from a tradition older and purer than the amalgamated religions of the region. Their key responsibilities included advising Apophis on Canaanite relations and potential alliances or threats, serving as a moral compass within the court, maintaining fidelity to monotheistic values amid cultural pluralism, educating scribes in sacred tradition, including law, psalmody, genealogy, and covenantal ethics. As the day closed, Darda and Mahol turned to their students, young scribes, noble sons, and sometimes foreign envoys eager to learn. Darda's teachings ranged from astronomy to justice, always framed within the understanding that creation was ordered by a single, righteous God. Mahol, in turn, instructed in sacred music, oral tradition, and symbolic movement, not for entertainment. Avaris was no ordinary city. Archaeology reveals it as one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the ancient world. Excavations show Minoan frescoes, Semitic burial customs, and Egyptian temples coexisting. This aligns closely with David Rohl's controversial but fascinating theory that the Hyksos were not invaders in the traditional sense, but displaced rulers of high civilizations from the east. Rohl's theory in Lords of Avaris suggests that these rulers may have had ties to early Mediterranean dynasties, possibly Hittite or Proto-Greek elites. Darda, therefore, did not just move south. He moved into the heart of an evolving global network. At the court of Apophis, Darda and Mahol served not as mere functionaries but as ministers of culture and foreign affairs. They brought with them the ethical wisdom of the North, knowledge of genealogies, astronomy, and law. Darda was instrumental in building diplomatic ties between Avaris and the emerging powers of Anatolia. Through his efforts, trade with Hattusa and Alalak increased. With Mahol, he helped establish formalized academies where scribes and young noblemen from various regions came to study. It was in these academies that the idea of a Council of Nations first formed. Legends say Darda once mediated a treaty between a Hittite prince and a Minoan ambassador, preventing a war over maritime trade routes. The name Darda evokes another interesting association, that of Dardanus, the mythical founder of Troy. The parallels between Darda, the son of Mahol, and Dardanus are striking. Just as the name Mahol evokes a larger mythological tradition that stretches far beyond biblical Canaan, Darda's name itself may hold the key to a much larger mythological and cultural connection. Dardanus, according to Greek mythology, was often seen as the son of Zeus and one of many gods who came to earth to spread their knowledge and wisdom. The similarities between the biblical Darda and the Trojan Dardanus suggest a kind of cultural cross-pollination, where the wisdom traditions of Canaan, through figures like Darda, may have played an indirect role in the cultural foundation of the city of Troy. As Darda aged, his influence grew. But he knew empires rise and fall. Prepared his descendants to continue his mission. One of his sons, Ithiel, would later journey to the Aegean coast. There, he would plant the seeds of future wisdom traditions among the early Greeks. The genetic lines EV13 and EV22, both haplogroups that form a deep connection between the people of Israel and the ancient Canaanite, Anatolian, Egyptian, Greek and even Mesopotamian populations. Not only provide biological evidence of cultural continuity but also strengthen the spiritual and intellectual traditions that unfolded in places like Shechem and Avaris. The journey of Darda, the son of Mahol, is not a simple chronology of events but a story of cultural cross-pollination, where different worlds met in the ancient cities of Shechem and Avaris. The remarkable thing about EV13 is the possible link with these figures and the singers and seers of Israel. Researchers suggest that the spread of EV13 to other areas around the Mediterranean and the Middle East may indicate Shechem's role as a dynamic center of cultural cross-pollination, where knowledge and rituals from different peoples came together. With EV22, which is strongly represented in the region of ancient Mesopotamia and Anatolia, we may see a connection with Hittite and Assyrian influences in the region, offering a broader view of how Shechem, as a crossroads of civilizations, exerted political and cultural influence on the development of ancient Israeli and Canaanite societies. This genetic descent may point to the deeper and more universal dimensions of wisdom that were spread from here. Today, we look back at figures like Darda and Mahol not merely as relics of mythology, but as real actors in the grand drama of civilizations. Their wisdom dance, rooted in the hills of Canaan and tested in the courts of pharaohs, became a bridge between East and West, between the divine and the political, between origin and destiny. We trace their steps not just through scripture or stone, but through the deep pulse of human ancestry, the ancient code of the blood that still sings in us. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were not only sages, but stewards of something far greater, a memory of origin, a whisper of eternity. Darda, the counselor of Shechem, who walked into Avaris as a man, departed as a legend. And the rhythm of his wisdom still dances across the ages. And so, as the dust of time settles, we close with the solemn words of the teacher from Ecclesiastes, the wisest of all men, Solomon, whose voice still cuts through the silence. He, God Almighty, has made it all beautiful in its time. Even the ages he has put in their hearts, except that no one finds out the work that God does, from the beginning to the end. Thank you for joining me on this journey into our shared past. If today's episode sparked your curiosity about where we come from and where we're going, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Search for Origin. Here, history, faith, and science come together to reveal the deeper stories that shaped our world. And if you're ready to walk in the footsteps of the past yourself, I now offer exclusive museum and city tours in the Netherlands and Germany. Discover the hidden layers of art, culture, and faith with a personal guide who speaks your language and knows the ground you're walking on. To book a tour or ask questions, reach out at dukes@tonline.de, that is DJOEKS@tonline.de, or look at the information in the channel's description. Your origin story is waiting. See you all in the next episode.